The moment did not explode with noise or spectacle. It arrived quietly, wrapped in a thin smile and a single request that seemed almost invisible in a world obsessed with volume and status. In a room polished by wealth and ego, where confidence was loud and humility was mistaken for weakness, one small action began to unravel a truth so heavy it would soon crush every assumption built inside that space. No one noticed it yet, but power had already shifted. The kind of power that waits patiently, letting arrogance expose itself before striking. Before the story deepens, take a moment to notice where you are watching from. This story is traveling across beautiful countries, from the wide cities of the USA to the historic streets of the UK, from the vast landscapes of Canada to the vibrant coasts of Australia, and beyond. If you love your country and feel proud calling it home, support this story by liking, sharing, and subscribing. And write your country's name in the description so we can see which nation rises to the top as this story unfolds around the world. The setting was a private financial lounge inside one of the most exclusive banking towers in the city. The kind of place where marble floors reflected polished shoes, where silence itself felt expensive, and where wealth was not questioned, only recognized. This was where high-level investors moved money like chess pieces and where reputation mattered more than truth. Inside this space, the millionaire had arrived exactly as expected, wrapped in confidence, escorted by admiration, and fueled by the belief that money made him untouchable. His presence bent the room toward him. Staff moved faster, shoulders straightened, and subtle nods followed his path. This was not respect earned in that moment, but respect bought over time. Years of visible success, media recognition, and public displays of luxury had built an image so strong that few ever looked beyond it. He was used to being believed without being questioned, admired without being challenged, and obeyed without resistance. And then there was her. She did not match the room. Not because she looked out of place, but because she did not try to belong to it. Her appearance was simple, almost intentionally unremarkable. No glittering jewelry, no designer labels screaming for attention. Just calm posture, steady breathing, and eyes that observed rather than reacted. She carried herself with a quiet certainty that did not ask for approval. People noticed her only briefly, and then dismissed her just as quickly. In rooms like this, silence was often mistaken for insignificance. Her presence was filed away as irrelevant, a background detail in a space dominated by louder stories. Yet beneath that simplicity was something far heavier. A past shaped by patience. A journey built in silence. A life constructed not on display, but in depth. She had learned long ago that true power did not announce itself. It waited. The millionaire barely acknowledged her existence at first. His attention was fixed on screens, figures, and faces that mirrored his own sense of importance. He was comfortable here, because this world was designed to affirm people like him. People who measured worth in numbers and assumed that numbers told the full story. What he did not realize was that this room had never truly tested him. It had only applauded him. The woman's request came without drama, without urgency, and without emotion. It was not a challenge. It was not a performance. It was simply a step she had been preparing to take for a very long time. To her, this moment was not about proving anything. It was about revealing what had always existed. The reaction around her was subtle but telling. A pause. A flicker of disbelief. A few restrained smiles that leaned toward judgment rather than curiosity. The kind of reaction that surfaces when people believe they already know the outcome. The millionaire's amusement did not need words to be understood. His confidence assumed victory before the process even began. He had seen this type of situation countless times. People who wanted to feel important. People who reached for validation in places they did not belong. People who confused access with influence. To him, this was another predictable scene, already finished in his mind. What he failed to consider was the difference between visibility and reality. As systems prepared to respond and screens waited to illuminate the truth, the room leaned into its expectations. Wealthy environments have a way of reinforcing their own beliefs. They reward certainty, punish humility, and often confuse appearance with substance. Everyone there had unconsciously chosen a side, and it was not hers. But stories do not belong to crowds. They belong to moments. And this moment was no longer controlled by the room. The woman remained still, untouched by the energy shifting around her. She did not scan faces for reactions. She did not adjust her posture to appear stronger. She did not prepare for defense or explanation. Her calm was not ignorance. It was confidence born from knowing exactly what was coming next. Her life had taught her the value of restraint, of letting people underestimate her, of allowing assumptions to grow so large that when they collapsed, they did so completely. She had walked through loss, sacrifice, and long years of building something that did not demand applause. Every step had been intentional. Every decision measured. Every success hidden behind normalcy. The millionaire, surrounded by affirmation, did not notice the shift happening inside himself. He did not realize that this was the first time in years his certainty stood on unstable ground. His smile remained, but something beneath it hesitated. Not enough to stop him, but enough to matter. As attention turned toward the screen that would soon reveal the truth, the room held its breath without knowing why. This was not anticipation built on hope, but on expectation. The expectation that the world would behave as it always had. That power would remain where it belonged. That wealth would stay predictable. But unpredictability was already in motion. This was no longer about money. It was about perception. About the silent war between arrogance and restraint. About the moment when a lifetime of quiet preparation finally meets an audience that never believed it existed. The screen had not yet changed. The truth had not yet surfaced. But something irreversible had begun. Because once reality replaces assumption, there is no way back. And as the system prepared to load, as confidence hovered just seconds away from collapse, the millionaire had no idea that the next moment would dismantle everything he thought he understood about power, success, and control. The screen was about to light up. And when it did, nothing in that room would ever feel the same again. The screen awakened slowly, as if even technology sensed the weight of what it was about to reveal. In that brief pause, the room existed in suspension, balanced between confidence and consequence. The millionaire remained relaxed, his body language untouched by doubt, because doubt was a foreign concept in spaces that had always bent in his favor. To him, this was a formality, a minor interruption in a day filled with confirmations of his superiority. Yet beneath the polished surface of his certainty, something fragile stirred. The woman stood exactly as before, her expression unchanged, her posture steady. Time seemed to respect her calm. She had waited years for moments like this, not because she craved exposure, but because truth eventually demands daylight. This was not the first time she had been underestimated, and it would not be the last. But it would be the most unforgettable. As the system processed, memories rose quietly within her. Long nights when progress felt invisible. Decisions that demanded sacrifice rather than celebration. She remembered how often success had required silence, how growth had been built away from applause. She had learned that loud victories attract attention, but quiet ones endure. Everything she had built existed beyond rooms like this, beyond opinions, beyond judgment. The room, however, was not built for patience. A few seconds stretched uncomfortably. Subtle shifts occurred as eyes narrowed and interest sharpened. What was once dismissed as a trivial moment now carried an unfamiliar tension. People leaned forward slightly, not out of respect, but curiosity. Something about the delay unsettled the predictable rhythm of wealth. The millionaire noticed it too, though he would never admit it. His smile held, but it no longer felt effortless. His mind searched for reassurance, replaying past experiences where outcomes always aligned with expectation. He reminded himself who he was, where he stood, and how many times numbers had validated his identity. He did not yet realize that numbers were about to challenge it. When the screen finally responded, it did so without emotion. No music. No announcement. Just data. Clean, precise, unforgiving. The kind of truth that does not negotiate. At first, the information seemed incomplete. A few figures appeared, then more, stacking into a structure that demanded attention. Silence thickened. The room shifted again, this time more noticeably. What had been casual observation turned into focused scrutiny. The millionaire leaned forward, his confidence narrowing into concentration. Something about the arrangement unsettled him. It did not match the pattern his mind expected. His certainty began to wobble, not collapse, but bend. The woman remained still. As the full display settled into place, the air in the room changed completely. It was not shock yet, but disbelief approaching realization. Numbers, once symbols of power, now carried weight beyond calculation. They told a story no one had prepared for. The balance was not modest. It was not impressive. It was staggering. The scale of it did not align with appearances, status, or assumptions. It existed in a realm that redefined success rather than competing with it. This was not money accumulated for display. This was wealth constructed with precision, foresight, and control. For the first time, the millionaire's confidence fractured. His mind raced to reconcile what he was seeing with what he believed. The numbers contradicted everything his instincts had concluded moments earlier. He searched for error, delay, or misinterpretation. But systems like this did not exaggerate. They reported. Around them, reactions emerged in restrained forms. Subtle gasps caught and suppressed. Eyebrows lifted then froze. People exchanged glances they pretended not to make. Respect, once reserved for familiarity, began to rearrange itself. The woman's past, invisible moments ago, suddenly mattered. People wondered what they had missed. What assumptions had blinded them? How many times they had mistaken noise for substance? Their curiosity grew not from admiration alone, but from self-reflection. The millionaire felt exposed, not because he was poor, but because he was no longer the measure. His laughter from moments earlier echoed inside his mind, now hollow, now misplaced. He had believed the story was finished before it began. He had been wrong. And wrongness, when public, leaves marks. The screen remained unchanged, holding the truth steady. There was no need to refresh it. No need to add context. It had already rewritten the narrative. Yet this was only the surface. Because the numbers did not explain how the woman had built this empire. They did not reveal the choices, risks, or sacrifices behind it. They did not show the shadows she had navigated or the reason she had chosen this moment, this place, and this silence. Those answers waited beyond the screen. As the room struggled to adjust to its new reality, one thing became clear. This moment was not an ending. It was an opening. A crack in a facade that had never been tested before. And as the millionaire sat frozen between disbelief and forced composure, the woman finally prepared to move forward. Not to speak, but to change everything. Because the balance was only the beginning. And what came next would expose far more than numbers ever could.
The silence that followed was heavier than any sound that could have filled the room. It was the kind of silence that pressed inward, forcing thoughts to surface and assumptions to collapse. The numbers on the screen did not fade, did not blink, and did not apologize for their existence. They simply remained, unmovable and undeniable, like a truth that had waited long enough. The room no longer belonged to the millionaire. His presence, once dominant, now felt strangely reduced. Not because his wealth had vanished, but because it had been reframed. He was no longer exceptional. He was no longer the benchmark. In a space designed to glorify power, he had been quietly dethroned by someone no one had bothered to see. The woman did not enjoy the shift. That was the difference. She did not feed on attention or thrive on comparison. Her wealth had never been about winning rooms or proving worth. It had been built for freedom, security, and control over her own life. This moment was not a victory lap. It was an unavoidable consequence of stepping into a system that demanded proof. Behind her calm stood an empire no one had traced back to her name. Years earlier, she had learned how visibility invited interference. Early success had taught her a dangerous lesson: the louder the achievement, the faster people tried to claim it, challenge it, or consume it. So she chose a different path. She separated identity from ownership. She let others underestimate her while she quietly expanded. Her investments were layered, structured through trusts, private holdings, and strategic partnerships. She had entered industries not for recognition, but for leverage. Technology, logistics, real estate corridors others overlooked. Sustainable energy before it became fashionable. She moved early, exited late, and never chased applause. Every step had been intentional. While others chased headlines, she studied patterns. While confidence was being displayed, she was being calculated. She understood that real power was patient, that it multiplied when left undisturbed. She had built wealth the way architects build foundations, deep, reinforced, and unseen. The room, now re-examining her presence, could not reconcile the simplicity they saw with the complexity she represented. Their minds searched for an explanation that preserved their comfort. Maybe inheritance. Maybe a silent partner. Maybe luck. They failed to understand that discipline often looks like luck to those who did not practice it. The millionaire, still seated, felt the room drift away from him. He noticed how attention lingered elsewhere, how his reactions no longer guided the energy. For the first time, he was observing power instead of possessing it. And that unsettled him more than loss ever could. His success had been visible, celebrated, reinforced by others' admiration. He had built his identity in public. But public success comes with public fragility. It depends on perception, on constant validation, on being believed. The woman did not depend on belief. Her empire did not care who acknowledged it. It functioned regardless of opinion. And now that it had surfaced, it demanded respect without asking. The staff, trained to respond to status, subtly adjusted. Movements became careful. Attention became precise. This was not favoritism. It was instinct. Systems respond to gravity. The woman's calm presence now carried weight. Not because she changed, but because everyone else did. What none of them knew was that this moment was not accidental. She had chosen this institution intentionally. Not for validation, but for transition. Something was shifting in her life, and silence alone could no longer protect what she was about to move. She had outgrown invisibility. Her empire had reached a scale that required alignment rather than concealment. Regulations, restructuring, and redirection lay ahead. This moment was not about proving wealth. It was about opening doors that only recognized numbers, not stories. The millionaire sensed this shift without fully understanding it. He realized that she was not here to challenge him. He was incidental. A symbol of the world she was stepping beyond. That realization cut deeper than embarrassment. He had mistaken the moment for a contest. She had treated it as a transaction. As the room recalibrated, whispers formed at the edges, restrained but alive. Curiosity turned into speculation. Who was she? Where had this come from? Why now? But answers were not offered. She gathered her composure, not because she needed it, but because the next phase required clarity. This was not the climax of her story. It was the reveal before movement. The numbers on the screen, still glowing, were only a doorway. Beyond them waited negotiations, power shifts, and decisions that would ripple outward. Her presence in this room was the first visible sign of something much larger repositioning itself. The millionaire, watching her prepare to leave the space where he once ruled unquestioned, felt the ground beneath his certainty continue to erode. He had laughed because he believed the story was simple. Now he understood how wrong he had been. Because the most dangerous thing in the world is not arrogance. It is the quiet strength you never see coming. And as the woman turned toward the next step of her journey, the room realized that this was not a moment they would forget. It was a beginning they had failed to anticipate. What followed would reshape far more than reputations. And none of them were ready for it. The room did not return to normal after she moved forward. Normal no longer existed there. Something permanent had shifted, the way tectonic plates move beneath the surface long before the Earth responds. Every glance, every breath, every calculation now carried the aftershock of what had been revealed. The woman had not raised her voice or demanded recognition, yet her presence rewrote the hierarchy with effortless finality. As she walked away from the screen, the numbers followed her in the minds of everyone present. They no longer saw simplicity. They saw history. A history they had ignored, dismissed, and failed to imagine. Outside that room, her past waited like a shadow finally allowed to stretch into daylight. She had not always lived in control. There was a time when survival required endurance rather than strategy. Long before investments and balance sheets, there were years defined by limitation. Not poverty that begged for sympathy, but constraint that demanded resilience. She had learned early how quickly the world assigns value and how rarely it revises its judgment. Those lessons shaped her restraint. In her earliest years, she watched opportunity pass by people who looked like her, sounded like her, and carried the same quiet determination. She saw how potential was overlooked simply because it arrived without noise. She learned then that to rise, she would have to build beyond visibility. Education became her first silent weapon. Not degrees displayed on walls, but knowledge absorbed, tested, and refined. She studied systems instead of shortcuts. She understood that money followed structure, not desire. While others chased speed, she invested in understanding. Mistakes came, but they became assets rather than scars. Losses sharpened her discipline. Failures clarified her instincts. She never rushed to recover reputation, because she had never attached herself to one. Her first major success came unnoticed. A calculated risk in an overlooked sector produced returns that stunned even her. She did not celebrate publicly. She reinvested quietly. Growth layered upon growth, each move protected by distance from attention. She built networks without names. Partnerships without faces. Ownership without noise. The past that now stood behind her was not glamorous, but it was unbreakable. Back in the present, the millionaire wrestled with a memory he had avoided for years. His rise had been loud, fast, and praised. But it had also been rushed. He had chased dominance, not durability. In that room, confronted by someone whose wealth had been shaped by patience, he felt the thinness of his foundation. He realized that admiration had insulated him from self-examination. The woman, however, had been shaped by examination. As she moved through the corridor beyond the financial lounge, staff responded differently now. Not with awe, but with precision. They sensed importance without being told. Authority no longer needed introduction. This was where the story deepened. Because her appearance in that room had not only unsettled egos. It had triggered recognition in places that mattered. Systems began to react beyond human emotion. Alerts, internal flags, quiet acknowledgements. Institutions do not gossip, but they remember. Her wealth had crossed thresholds that demanded oversight. Behind closed doors, unseen eyes began to watch. Analysts reviewed structures. Compliance teams rechecked files that had once blended into anonymity. Not because she had done anything wrong, but because magnitude demands attention. She had anticipated this. The past she carried was not only personal. It was strategic. She had prepared for scrutiny long before it arrived. Every record aligned. Every structure justified. Every decision defensible. Her empire was clean. The millionaire, left behind, tried to reclaim composure. But something irreversible had happened. The room would remember him differently now. His laughter, once dismissed as confidence, would echo as arrogance. Reputation does not shatter loudly. It erodes quietly. He wondered how many times he had mistaken visibility for security. For the woman, this was not about correction. It was about progression. She had stepped into the light because the next chapter of her life required transparency. Expansion at this level could not remain invisible. Influence required alignment with systems, not evasion of them. She was no longer hiding. As she exited the building, the city outside continued its rhythm, unaware of the shift that had just occurred. Traffic moved. People hurried. Life unfolded without acknowledgement of the quiet recalibration that had taken place. But ripples were spreading.
Decisions made in rooms like that shaped markets, futures, and narratives. And she had just altered one. What none of them realized yet was that her past was about to collide with forces far larger than individual perception. Forces that did not laugh, did not underestimate, and did not forgive miscalculation. Her story was no longer contained. And as attention followed her beyond the marble walls, one question lingered unanswered. Why now? The answer waited ahead. And it would test everything she had built.
The room did not return to normal after she moved forward. Normal no longer existed there. Something permanent had shifted, the way tectonic plates move beneath the surface long before the earth responds. Every glance, every breath, every calculation now carried the aftershock of what had been revealed. The woman had not raised her voice or demanded recognition, yet her presence rewrote the hierarchy with effortless finality. As she walked away from the screen, the numbers followed her in the minds of everyone present. They no longer saw simplicity. They saw history. A history they had ignored, dismissed, and failed to imagine. Outside that room, her past waited like a shadow finally allowed to stretch into daylight. She had not always lived in control. There was a time when survival required endurance rather than strategy. Long before investments and balance sheets, there were years defined by limitation. Not poverty that begged for sympathy, but constraint that demanded resilience. She had learned early how quickly the world assigns value and how rarely it revises its judgment. Those lessons shaped her restraint. In her earliest years, she watched opportunity pass by people who looked like her, sounded like her, and carried the same quiet determination. She saw how potential was overlooked simply because it arrived without noise. She learned then that to rise, she would have to build beyond visibility. Education became her first silent weapon. Not degrees displayed on walls, but knowledge absorbed, tested, and refined. She studied systems instead of shortcuts. She understood that money followed structure, not desire. While others chased speed, she invested in understanding. Mistakes came, but they became assets rather than scars. Losses sharpened her discipline. Failures clarified her instincts. She never rushed to recover reputation, because she had never attached herself to one. Her first major success came unnoticed. A calculated risk in an overlooked sector produced returns that stunned even her. She did not celebrate publicly. She reinvested quietly. Growth layered upon growth, each move protected by distance from attention. She built networks without names. Partnerships without faces. Ownership without noise. The past that now stood behind her was not glamorous, but it was unbreakable. Back in the present, the millionaire wrestled with a memory he had avoided for years. His rise had been loud, fast, and praised. But it had also been rushed. He had chased dominance, not durability. In that room, confronted by someone whose wealth had been shaped by patience, he felt the thinness of his foundation. He realized that admiration had insulated him from self-examination. The woman, however, had been shaped by examination. As she moved through the corridor beyond the financial lounge, staff responded differently now. Not with awe, but with precision. They sensed importance without being told. Authority no longer needed introduction. This was where the story deepened. Because her appearance in that room had not only unsettled egos. It had triggered recognition in places that mattered. Systems began to react beyond human emotion. Alerts, internal flags, quiet acknowledgements. Institutions do not gossip, but they remember. Her wealth had crossed thresholds that demanded oversight. Behind closed doors, unseen eyes began to watch. Analysts reviewed structures. Compliance teams rechecked files that had once blended into anonymity. Not because she had done anything wrong, but because magnitude demands attention. She had anticipated this. The past she carried was not only personal. It was strategic. She had prepared for scrutiny long before it arrived. Every record aligned. Every structure justified. Every decision defensible. Her empire was clean. The millionaire, left behind, tried to reclaim composure. But something irreversible had happened. The room would remember him differently now. His laughter, once dismissed as confidence, would echo as arrogance. Reputation does not shatter loudly. It erodes quietly. He wondered how many times he had mistaken visibility for security. For the woman, this was not about correction. It was about progression. She had stepped into the light because the next chapter of her life required transparency. Expansion at this level could not remain invisible. Influence required alignment with systems, not evasion of them. She was no longer hiding. As she exited the building, the city outside continued its rhythm, unaware of the shift that had just occurred. Traffic moved. People hurried. Life unfolded without acknowledgement of the quiet recalibration that had taken place. But ripples were spreading. Decisions made in rooms like that shaped markets, futures, and narratives. And she had just altered one. What none of them realized yet was that her past was about to collide with forces far larger than individual perception. Forces that did not laugh, did not underestimate, and did not forgive miscalculation. Her story was no longer contained. And as attention followed her beyond the marble walls, one question lingered unanswered. Why now? The answer waited ahead. And it would test everything she had built. Visibility is a price, not a reward. The woman understood this better than anyone else in that building. As her presence echoed beyond the private financial lounge, the world she had carefully kept at a distance began to take notice. Attention does not arrive alone. It brings scrutiny, expectation, and consequence. And now, all three were moving toward her at once. The shift was subtle at first. Increased inquiries. Requests that carried more urgency than politeness. Institutions that once processed her affairs quietly now wanted clarity, meetings, alignment. Her name, once shielded behind structures, began surfacing in internal conversations where decisions shaped entire markets. She had prepared for this moment, but preparation does not eliminate weight. It only makes it survivable. Her wealth had crossed from private power into public relevance. And public relevance attracts more than admiration. It attracts opposition. There were those who saw opportunity in her emergence. Those who sensed leverage, alliances, influence. But there were also those who saw threat. Systems protect themselves. Established power does not welcome disruption without resistance. The woman knew this landscape well. She had studied it from the outside for years. She understood how influence moved quietly before it demanded attention. Now she was no longer observing. She was inside. Her days became layered with complexity. Meetings without faces. Conversations measured in subtext. Decisions that carried weight beyond profit. She moved carefully, not out of fear, but out of respect for consequence. At this level, missteps do not bruise. They destabilize. Meanwhile, the millionaire watched from a distance as his world responded differently to him. Doors still opened, but not as widely. Laughter still followed, but with less conviction. The room had learned something about him, and learning cannot be undone. He felt the cost of underestimation in reverse. His mistake had not been laughter alone. It had been certainty. Certainty that blinded him to the complexity beyond appearance. He began to question moments he had dismissed, people he had overlooked. For the first time, success felt fragile. The woman did not notice his struggle. She had moved beyond that moment. For her, the past was not a place to revisit, but a foundation to build from. Yet visibility demanded sacrifices. Privacy began to erode. Distance shrank. Every movement carried interpretation. Every decision carried expectation. She had built her empire to serve her life, not consume it. Now she had to ensure that exposure did not reverse that balance. She delegated more. trusted fewer. Power requires filtration. At night, when silence returned, she reflected on the path that had led here. She had chosen restraint when others chose display. She had chosen patience when others chose speed. Now, those choices were being tested by forces that did not value subtlety. She questioned nothing about her discipline. But she understood that the next phase required adaptation. Her empire was no longer just hers. It had influence. And influence carries responsibility. Behind the scenes, resistance formed. Quiet challenges. Strategic obstacles. Moves designed to test her boundaries. This was how the world measured newcomers. Not with confrontation, but with pressure. She responded without noise. Where others would push back publicly, she absorbed and redirected. Where challenges appeared, she adjusted structure. She did not react emotionally. She reacted strategically. Every response reinforced the truth she already knew. She belonged here. The millionaire, still wrestling with his diminished certainty, watched her navigate spaces he had once dominated. He saw the difference between inherited confidence and earned control. And though he would never admit it, something inside him shifted from resentment to reluctant respect. The cost of being seen had reshaped both of them. For him, it exposed weakness. For her, it revealed strength. Yet the greatest test had not arrived. Because visibility does not only attract resistance. It attracts revelation. The kind that reaches backward as much as it moves forward. Her past, once shielded, now invited questions she had avoided answering publicly. Questions about origin, motive, and intention. Questions that did not threaten her wealth, but her narrative. She could no longer remain undefined. And definition is dangerous. As pressure built and attention sharpened, she faced a choice she had postponed for years. Remain guarded and risk misinterpretation. Or step forward fully and risk everything she had protected. The world waited. Not because it demanded explanation. But because power, once noticed, must either hide again or stand. And she was done hiding. As forces aligned and consequences approached, the next move would determine not only her future, but the legacy of everything she had built. The moment of truth was no longer behind her. It was directly ahead.
The final turning point did not arrive with applause or confrontation. It arrived with resolve. The kind that settles deep, steady, and unshakable. The woman had crossed a threshold that could not be reversed, and she understood that this moment would define not only how she was seen, but how she chose to exist in the world going forward. For years, silence had protected her. Now, clarity would guide her. She stepped fully into visibility, not as a reaction to judgment, but as a declaration of direction. The systems that once watched from a distance now aligned themselves around her presence. Institutions adjusted their posture. Decision-makers recalibrated expectations. When real power becomes undeniable, resistance transforms into negotiation. She did not offer spectacle. She offered structure. Her empire, once fragmented by design, now revealed its coherence. Each element fit with intention. Each layer reinforced the next. What appeared sudden to outsiders was the result of years of deliberate alignment. This was not emergence. It was arrival. The world began to understand that her wealth was not an accident of timing, but a consequence of discipline. She had never chased opportunity blindly. She had positioned herself where opportunity inevitably passed. That difference mattered. Her story reshaped narratives far beyond that original room. It traveled across financial circles, private discussions, and quiet evaluations. Not as a myth, but as a reference point. Proof that restraint could outperform arrogance. That patience could build what visibility could not sustain. The millionaire, now distant from the center of attention, watched with a clarity he had never possessed before. He recognized how easily confidence could turn into complacency. How quickly admiration could disguise vulnerability. The laughter that once defined him had been replaced by reflection. He did not lose everything. But he lost certainty. And in its place, something more valuable began to form: awareness. He saw how the woman moved through pressure without reacting to it. How she shaped outcomes without demanding recognition. How influence followed her not because she sought it, but because she understood it. This was power he had never learned to wield. The contrast was undeniable. As her presence stabilized markets and redirected conversations, something quieter happened beneath the surface. People who had once been overlooked began to see themselves differently. They recognized the strength in patience, the advantage in preparation, the power in silence. Her journey became a mirror. She did not build institutions to glorify herself. She built them to endure beyond her. Legacy mattered more than validation. Freedom mattered more than applause. Control over her time mattered more than control over rooms. The balance that once shocked a handful of observers now carried meaning far greater than its numbers. It symbolized the moment assumptions failed, the moment judgment collapsed, the moment truth replaced narrative. That was the real shift. She did not change who she was after being seen. She simply allowed the world to catch up. Her calm remained. Her discipline remained. Her vision remained. And because of that, nothing could take what she had built. The room where it all began faded into history. A footnote. A reminder that moments of arrogance often precede revelations of truth. The laughter that once echoed there now served as contrast to the silence that followed. Silence, she knew, was never empty. It was preparation. Her story did not end with wealth. It expanded with purpose. With influence guided by intention rather than ego. With decisions shaped by responsibility rather than reaction. And somewhere, far beyond that city, someone watching this story felt a shift inside themselves. A realization that quiet effort matters. That being underestimated is not a weakness. That timing is everything. Because the balance was never just about money. It was about knowing who you are before the world decides who you should be. And when the moment arrived, she did not need to prove anything. She was already ready.